So yes, so this session we're going to be talking about different challenges to implementing data literacy programs and designing data literacy programs that kind of suit the needs of our audiences. So most of this session is going to be a discussion, but before we get started, I really want to spend a bit of time on introductions. So we're going to, each of the panelists, we have 4 fantastic panelists here with us today, and they're all going to introduce themselves. Then I'm going to do a very short kind of 2 minute, 3 minutes on the kind of state of data literacy, just kind of setting the groundwork. So we're all kind of coming at this session from a similar perspective. And then we're going to jump into the discussion. And I have kind of brainstormed 4 data literacy challenges that I see organizations face, and the panelists are going to kind of respond about their kind of best practices, strategies, tactics of overcoming these challenges. Throughout the session, we ask you to kind of drop into the chat any questions that you might have. And yeah, with that, let's get started. So, introductions. Again, I'm going to say this for the last time. I'd like you to drop into the chat and introduce yourself. So your name, the organization you're with, and your top data literacy challenge. So I want to hear from everyone kind of what they're experiencing and what they've struggled with in terms of either upskilling themselves or upskilling their organization. And with that, we're going to meet the panelists. So first, I'm going to hand over to Alan Mills from Map Action to introduce himself. Over to you, Alan.
Hello, good day, everybody. Yes, I'm Alan Mills from Map Action, which is an organization that creates mapping and other information products for humanitarian response. Often our niche is that we're actually alongside the responders in the field. Personally, I've been a volunteer since 2005, and I'm the preparedness coordinator. So I'm helping to prepare the environment in which we work in response, and as well as data, new technologies, operational procedures and such like. Capacity building and training is a massive part of what we try and do with our partner organizations. My little data literacy story, it goes back to my first ever mission in Dominican Republic when I was looking after a tropical storm response. And someone came up to me and said, we've got 300 people in San Juan who need assistance. And when I looked on the map, there were 40 San Juans in Dominican Republic, one of which was a province. And that still remains a challenge, is identifying the geographical angle of the data in our work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alan. So happy to have you here on the panel. And now over to you, Cedric, from School of Data and the Open Knowledge Foundation. Can you introduce yourself? You're on mute.
Thank you. Hi, Cedric Lambion from the Open Knowledge Foundation. So I am the Data Innovation Lead for the Open Knowledge Foundation, and I coordinate the School of Data network. I was actually initially a volunteer member of the School of Data network, going around the streets of Paris, working with local civil society organizations around using data to help the migrant crisis in 2015, and also using data to empower citizens in understanding their environment and then ask for improvements in their neighborhood. And from there, I moved up in terms of scope and started working with Open Knowledge and the School of Data Network in delivering capacity building projects around the world. And I think one story that illustrates well the kind of work that we've been doing is that we've been working, for example, with indigenous populations in Indonesia, trying to understand how they can better secure their rights around their lands, especially in the face of forestry licensing that is kind of the Wild West over there. And like when we work with these kind of populations, we often say that the hardest part is not to get people to sit in front of you and to understand what is data and how to use it. The hardest part is to actually understand the context of their lives, context of their action, and make sure that through that understanding, you can build with them something that will last beyond the specific time of your intervention. So that's the kind of work that we do.
Great, thank you so much, Cedric. And Cedric and I used to work with School of Data, so it's so great to be here with you again. And now over to Dirk, another long-standing colleague of mine. Can you please introduce yourself and the work that you do?
Sure. So hi, everyone. I'm Dirk. I like to refer myself as being the Fab Writer in Fab Writers, but Fab Writers is the consultancy, and I am blessed with the fact that I do consultancy with a couple of people that are here on this panel, but also a number of you that are here in the room and are listening are people that I have worked with. And I think probably the just sort of nutshell is I've spent the last quarter of a century working with people doing social change stuff in probably over 30 different countries. And data capacity and data capacity building has always been at the core of that. I've also been doing a lot of research into how data literacy happens, and also helping my fine colleague Heather here in terms of building things like a data literacy playbook. And then on top of that, looking at how do you use resources to build and help and sustain networks, which I'll talk about a little bit further on in the thing. And within all of that, I don't have like a story that is super compelling, so I will just punt that particular one and let us get on with the introductions.
Thanks so much, Dirk. And then perfect, over to Heather to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Caitlin, and thanks for convening this conversation. It's really exciting to be here with everybody, and hello to those folks that have joined us. I look forward to your hard-pressing questions. Hopefully this is informative for you. So I always imagine this world if we lent a digital hand, and that's been my whole career MO, if you will, or modus. When I came to the Red Cross Red Crescent Society, which in 4 years ago, there was no data literacy program, and they said, "Hey, Heather, go build something about AI." And I said, "Pause. What do people really want?" And so we created a data playbook with hundreds of people around the world to be able to actually take all the best practices around different attributes around data, whether it be the data pipeline or responsible data. And we asked people to get some lessons, some scenarios, some games, some checklists. We're actually going to update that this year with the help of Dirk. And we certainly have been piloting things with the Center for Humanitarian Data, and glad that other humanitarians use it. Within the Red Cross Red Crescent, we also have just launched our strategy 2030. And in there, there's a whole component around digital transformation and the importance of data. So, I'll come to this a little bit later in terms of challenges around data literacy, but we've just had an incredible experience of making it a corporate or organizational priority. And that's also lots of hard work. When it comes to data literacy, we work with 192 national societies who are it's a federated body. They're their own members, so they make their own decisions about what their priorities are. But as humanitarians, we want to have data that supports the local communities, that's driven by the communities and guided by what their needs are, and then use that data aggregated to be able to make kind of larger global decisions. And so there's a number of tools and methods around that. And the last part, just to answer, is the story. One of my first workshops that I ran around data literacy at IFRC, I sent a note out to the whole staff in the Geneva office where I'm currently based. And I said, "Hey, let's talk about data." And I got all kinds of people from all different kinds of departments. And somebody told me it was the first time that someone had thought across the different sectors around how they use data and brought them all into the same room. The second kind of vignette from that was one person just stood up and said, if you could just get people to use Excel, it's in their hands, it's in their offices around the world. That's your main tool. Don't focus on the shiny stuff, focus on what we really need. By all means, do the shiny things, but also be where people are and know what they need. And I use that as a guiding principle to keep it simple and to also have a little bit of fun. So I always push at that particular person, but always thankful for the solid lessons because we've used that throughout our mandate over. And I'll drop those links in. Thanks, Caitlin.
Great, thank you so much. And last but not least, my name is Caitlin Rogers. I will be your moderator this evening or this morning or this very, very late evening, depending on where you are in the world. I work with the Center for Humanitarian Data, which is part of OCHA. What we are most known for is the Humanitarian Data Exchange, which is an open data portal with over 18,000 humanitarian data sets. So we'll drop the link into that. If you haven't used the Humanitarian Data Exchange, I strongly advise that you kind of explore. There's incredible data on the platform. In addition to managing this platform, and working with partners to get them to share data on this platform, we also work on data literacy, obviously, and data responsibility, making sure people are sharing that data safely and ethically, and making sure we take into account the needs and specific risks of vulnerable populations, and on predictive analytics. So really making sure that data is used to get incredible insights. So I'm going to be talking a little bit right now, so I won't go into too much more detail on who I am. My colleague has dropped some links into the chat if you want to kind of learn more about us. But yeah, so I'm going to just kind of kick us off. I wanted to give like what I guess I call like a state of play. I had said to the panelists that's a lot grander than what this actually is, but we're going to be spending most of the session talking about challenges. So what I want to just start off with is a little bit on what I think we've learned and a lot of the progress we've made as a kind of humanitarian and development sector around data literacy. So I started working on these issues back in 2013. And I think sometimes we focus on what's really, really hard. And it's not to say that there aren't a lot of challenges in front of us, but I also think that we've made a lot of progress. So the first kind of thing that I like to talk about when I think about the progress we made is that we're really able now more and more to admit that we have a problem. And the first step to addressing a problem is admitting that you have one. So increasingly, I think, you know, a lot of my colleagues on this call could probably speak to this as well. Before there was a lot of work that needed to be done, really advocating for the need for data literacy beyond maybe a few technical specialists within an organization. I'm definitely not claiming that this work is done, and there's a lot that we still need to do, but increasingly I feel myself pushing against an open door. People are acknowledging that this is something that we need to work on, and starting to understanding the types of investments that we need to be making. So that's something I think that we've learned. Increasingly as well, I think we have a better understanding that data literacy, this is a little bit what Heather was just speaking about, data literacy is much more than a narrow set of technical abilities. So when I talk about kind of data skills that we need within an organization, within teams, and sometimes within individuals, is a set of kind of strategic data skills. To me, these are skills to make sure that data is being used as an asset for the organization. So we know how to ask the right questions and we're collecting the right data, and really kind of the whole data management is in line with our strategic objectives. The sense-making data skills are some of my favorites, and these are the abilities to translate kind of complex technical exercises into decision makers who can use that evidence to make data-informed decisions. And finally, there's these kind of set of technical skills. And so I think more and more we've seen the need to not just focus on building those technical skills, and really like, how can we build also these kind of strategic data skills and the kind of sense-making data skills as well. And finally, I think I only had one more, sorry. I think increasingly, and again, this was kind of mentioned throughout, like as the panelists were introducing themselves, increasingly we understand that we need to take people and their needs into account. So Heather said, you know, when she first joined, she was asked to, you know, do this, you know, like this program on machine learning or artificial intelligence. And then she talked to people and the thing they needed was Excel. So these were some choice quotes from some research that we did about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, trying to understand what data needs were for the people that we were going to be designing training programs for. And it was, you know, there was a wide range of things. And what I took away from this as well, it's not just what they wanted to be trained on, it's how they like to learn and why they struggled with learning. And what came up again and again and again was people really struggled to create the space and the time for learning in their day. So when we designed a program, we really had to take that into account, whether we're doing online learning resources or designing a type of boot camp, like how can we take into account that the people that we're trying to train are struggling to fit learning into their day, into their week, into their year. So those are kind of the things that I feel like, the main things that I feel like we've learned as a kind of data literacy practitioner space over the last few years, and I think are kind of welcome advancements in the space. But of course, there are still challenges, and some of them are very related to the challenges in doing these type of things. Like, how do we take user needs into account, and how do we balance resources and time with the need to reach an ever increasing audience? So that is what we're going to talk about for the rest of the session. So the first challenge, so I put together 4 challenges. For each of these challenges, I'll give a little brief introduction to the challenge. I'll hand over to three colleagues to kind of respond. And then I ask you, please, if you have questions related to the challenge or related to something similar, please drop them in the chat and we'll make sure to ask them. My colleague Becky is kind of moderating the chat, so she will make sure that I see any questions that you guys have. And yeah, so the way I frame this first challenge is, so again, something that we've learned over the years as people doing this work is that for data programs to succeed, they need to be intentional. For me, this means they need to be aligned with the work and the mission of an organization that is receiving that type of training, or where that training is happening. And I see often this kind of no directional training where we're kind of plugging holes, or something comes up and we do something here. So there's no kind of strategy behind that training. And of course, I appreciate that there are a lot of reasons why this is hard. One of the reasons that I think this is hard is because the awareness of, of this kind of need for a strategic whole of office approach to data literacy is in itself a sign of data maturity within an organization. So I want to first hand over to Heather from IFRC. I thought that maybe you could give some insights. I know you did a lot of work aligning your data literacy work, trying to align that with IFRC's general strategy. And so, yeah, I thought you could kind of speak on this from the perspective of someone working from within an organization. So over to you.
Thanks, Caitlin. I do agree that often when people approach data literacy training, they do that whack-a-mole approach of, just filling in the gaps. And honestly, we're humanitarians. We need to support each other and offer things. And certainly during the time of COVID, that's been the case. But there is a point where you need to pull back. With our 4 years within the data literacy program, I worked within kind of 5 kind of early adopter groups, whether it be cash transfer or monitoring and evaluation or crisis and disaster teams, information management, and innovation. We worked within those teams because those were the teams that are already really strong in health, already strong on data. So find some examples that are already strong and then build examples with them and build within their learning networks, because they already have networks. And so I think that's the first real thing, is that find your allies and build your network. The second thing is that at some point you're going to have to go large. And so I took the opportunity with Strategy 2030, which is the Red Crescent's global strategy, because data and digital was heavily mentioned in it. I got involved early and said, if we get it into the policies, the practices, the strategic agendas, the plan and budgets, we'll win. And we actually did that. Last year, our digital strategy, I got pulled off of data literacy work and worked on the digital strategy team as a co-lead. And we made data literacy a top priority, which was voted on by our governing board, and will now go to next year's governing board, or this year's governing board, to go to the next stage. Inside of there's a whole maturity model. Because we work with 192 national societies, there is no one model for data literacy. You need to figure out how to modularize it to fit into people's day, as Caitlin said earlier, but also every organization, whether it be a different UN organization or whether it be the NRC and their country offices, everything's going to be a little bit different. And we want to recognize that in complexity, there's just going to be different approaches and different needs and priorities. And so we built out a maturity model with our friends at the Netherlands Red Cross 510, which actually looks to now analyze where people are at, and it's a self-assessment. And then we work with them to figure out how do we build data readiness around that. So there's a number of different models and maturity models that we're using to be able to assess it, but we're also putting our practices behind it. We're saying as a whole organization, we need a digital upgrade, and we're not alone. Many humanitarian organizations are doing that. And the thing that I love about our strategy that I think is really important is that it's not data for data's sake or digital for digital's sake. It's because it's there for humanitarian work in a digital age. It's not about the kind of pocketed AI stuff, which we are doing. We're doing amazing stuff. We have stuff, everything from the basic stuff of data for volunteers all the way up to the HEAC, which is kind of like a high level data analysis course that more senior people are doing. And so you really need to give the different models, but also get it into the policies and practices and follow that always be selling model. I never realized that I'd have to be a salesperson in order to get data literacy as a priority. And it's not about budget, it's about figuring out how to fit it into the workflow of very busy people doing amazing work around the world and being an ally for them so they can do the good work that they're doing over. So strategies, don't be shy if you have to go big. Sometimes you have to, and I was really glad to do that over. And now I can go work on the other things.
Thanks so much, Heather. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I was thinking about when I thought of this challenge is the role of data maturity models. So I'm really glad that kind of came up because I have found them really useful in working with offices as a tool of like, okay, this is where we are, this is where we want to go. We can design a roadmap. This is a little bit, it's tangible and it seems achievable because you can put a work plan behind it. So maybe from here, I'll go to Cedric. So, you lead this network of kind of training providers working on from the outside, you're kind of coming into an organization. So I thought it would be great to hear from you on kind of your perspective of when you come in and you're going to design a training for an organization or for a team. How do you kind of start with the kind of assessing where an organization is and helping them understand where they need to go so that their training priorities help them meet their actual organizational goals?
Yes, thank you. So I think this is very much in line with what I mentioned earlier about the easiest part of organizational capacity building is to get people to sit down in front of you and to teach about concrete data skills or something like that. The hardest part is everything around that, everything that makes your intervention sustainable, successful in the long term. And so there are data maturity models out there created by DataKind, remixed by other organizations that look at the culture of the organizations, that look at the leadership buy-in, that look at the tools. One of the things that we've learned over the years, because the School of Data Network and the School of Data Activities were very much focused at the beginning on individual capacity building. So as I said, it's easier. It's not easy, but it's easier in the sense that you target one individual, you evaluate where they are, where they need to be, and then you design a training to address that. And that's fine. We do have some strategies as well to try to get people to digest a bit better what they may have learned, and with some mentoring processes afterwards to get them to do projects. But that's kind of a solved problem. But getting an organization to change is very much an open question still today, and even there's no set recipe that will work. So there are guidelines, but one of the guidelines that we use, for example, is that we need to institutionalize competences. What does that mean? That means that unlike individual capacity building, where you focus on knowing where they are in terms of skill level, teaching them, and then for example, having them do a new project so that they can apply what they've learned. An organization has, different running projects, priorities. Maybe there's an election with all hands on deck coming up next year. And you may have come and taught them something that is very interesting for them, but like for the next 3 months, they can't do anything with that because for the next 3 months, they're all hands on deck for, election campaign or whatever. And so how do you then make sure that what you've taught them is not forgotten by the end of those 3 months or 6 months or whatever? And that's what we call institutionalize. So that means identifying within the organization how they already use data, as Heather was mentioning, where they are, meeting them where they are, and building on top of that. So saying, the way you share data, try to do it differently, giving them actionable knowledge that can be put in place immediately in a sustainable manner that will allow them to have a sort of thread of knowledge that will keep them linked to the broader set of skills that you taught them. And once they have the actual time to go back to what they've learned, which is more comprehensive than the specific skills about, like, for example, better formatting of your data when you share with your colleagues, better visualization of your data when you put in a report, very basic skill. But when they go back to the more intensive skills that they may have learned from you about creating maps or about doing more complex analysis, then they're not starting from scratch. And that's really important because there is a kind of clash between the funding timelines, the intervention timelines, and an organization's timeline. The organization is there, maybe they've been there for 20 years and they are looking at doing data projects in the next 20 years, but the funded project is for 6 months, 9 months, and that's a good scenario. But the organization timeline may not align perfectly with that. And so what we focus on is really making sure that as much as we can, we build on top of what they already have, instead of trying to make them change everything right away, in order for us to leave a trace within their existing processes that will allow them to more easily build up on that and reach the capacity, the skill level that we expect them to be able to do new things afterwards. So that's really, really important. And there's no set way to go about it, but using guidelines like data maturity models help you identify the things that you can interrogate. You on mute, Caitlin.
I hate that. Okay, thank you so much. Well, I said something really profound, but I won't repeat it, and I'll just hand over to Alan, who I see you have your hand up. So I wanted to let you jump in and kind of respond or give your perspective on this challenge.
Yeah, thank you. And it's really interesting, a lot of the chat comments that are coming through about very practical aspects of data literacy training within an organization. I think we shouldn't forget that this is always an evolving landscape as well. And we're seeing more and more issues of protection and privacy in humanitarian work that need to be evaluated when we're talking about data. We have to balance that with the practical use of data to save lives and help people recover from emergencies. And I think also we should acknowledge that we're no longer seen as an objective provider of impartial information as humanitarian organizations. And we've got to be, we're being challenged by social media, alternative data sources. And so, it really is very important for us to be more robust in the way humanitarians collect, aggregate, analyze, and disseminate data against that balance about still being able to be agile and relevant in an operational sense. So I'd just like to put that in there. Thank you.
Dirk, did you just come off mute? Did you want to jump in? Please.
Just only to say in the thing in terms of, one of the big problems with the challenge of no direction is that often people are collecting as much data as they possibly can without thinking about how they're going to use it. Just because the data is accessible doesn't mean that they should. And I think this point, you can overwhelm yourself by having way too much data, and then not, you're weighing yourself down in it. So in terms of that intentionality, you also have to be intentional about being focused on the data that you are collecting and making sure that you are putting the right amount of resources into data that's going to actually help you be effective and help you move forward.
Great, thank you so much, and I couldn't agree more. I see we have a kind of question/comment in the chat about best practices around kind of building on top of versus making people change everything. So this is kind of that organizational change bit, and also a comment that it feels easier said than done. I think we can all agree that it's definitely easier said than done. I do think we'll kind of start addressing some aspects of that in kind of the next challenges, because these really kind of build on top of each other. So yeah, we'll go on to the next challenge just in terms of time, but thank you everyone for your inputs, and remember, drop any questions into the chat. Also, we will be sharing the kind of data maturity models that are available that you can kind of use. So I saw that in the chat as well. So on to the next challenge very quickly. So I call this one the one size fits no one training. So I think what we know, and a lot of what we've talked about so far, is that data training programs, for them to work, they need to be grounded in the needs of the intended audience. They really need to be kind of rooted in what they do, their day-to-day work. Cedric and almost everyone has kind of touched on this point. If you train them in something and then they never go back to do that for 6 months, well, then they've probably forgotten it, and that can be difficult. So this is something that we know. My experience of why this is hard is because there are so many overlapping audiences within our organizations that require training, and there's often a poor understanding of their concrete needs. So for this one, to kind of go into, I'm going to start with Heather again, as our kind of resident insider, because you're kind of working inside an organization to build data literacy. So I wanted to hand over to you on some of the things that you've learned about kind of identifying the kind of concrete needs of distinct audiences. I know you work with IMs and with volunteers and with kind of non-technical staff. So how are you able to kind of identify these audiences, their needs, and then kind of prioritize approaches to training when there's kind of limited time, human time and resources? That's, in 2 minutes.
Well, thanks, Caitlin. I always appreciate 2 minutes to try and wrap up.
No, you have more time than that.
It's okay. I think when we did the data playbook beta, we just wanted to find out where people were at, and so we wanted to ask what the current training they used was, because people were just emailing those around. And so we built that with hundreds of people, because we thought if it's the best of breed, if you will, versions, then we could start somewhere. That also became a baseline for, oh, well, that doesn't serve everybody. So for every single workshop that I did with American Red Cross or British or Singapore or Nepal, we tailored everything. So in the data playbook, it was never anything that was not going to be remixed for the audience. And we actually worked with different national societies, whatever region we were in Kenya, in Senegal. We worked when we were in Senegal with OCHA, for that matter, the Humanitarian Data Center, Center for Humanitarian Data. We were with you. We tailored the content to be able to serve the audience and work with local staff to make sure that it was useful, and ask them what they thought the priorities were, rather than come in with a set deck. And so it's always about co-designing. I think that's really important. The second thing is that the data playbook was just one act. We took it and we built out, my colleague Margarita and the Netherlands Red Cross built out a Data for Volunteers online course, which anybody can take. It's on our e-learning platform, on the learning platforms. We then as well did a research project on how do we reach our decision makers? Are people using data for decision making? We did a whole report on that to be able to help inform our strategy work. Coming forward this year with the next round of the data playbook version 1, we're going to start over, and Dirk right now is doing a bunch of interviews. And so my point is that you need to always make it a human-centered design. This is about people and their skills, not what your passions are. Yes, of course, we all have our things that we like to do, but the thing that I found people were most bonded to was scenarios that they designed themselves or that examples that came from it. When we were in Bangkok, we had different people from the different national societies help us design what kind of experiences they had, whether they were doing the Haiti response or whether they were doing Typhoon Haiyan response. They used scenarios from that and then built up to try and build out learning. And so that way people have a more blended experience and a more shared experience, and it's really kind of real. And so that does take a little bit more time, but the thing is that as you're checking back in to see how people are doing over time, data is part of everyone's job, and it's going to be and it's going to be changing every single time that you do something, as Cedric was saying. So you need to be ready to just shift things as much as possible. So I never look at a workshop and say, oh, I'll just use the same slide deck as something else. I always think about who's in the room, how can I work with them and with what they need. And I'm very thankful that a lot of people are open to that rather than just getting a standard deck over. I think you're on mute, Caitlin.
It doesn't show in my box. It doesn't show that I'm on mute, and it's driving me a little crazy. But sorry about that. Okay. So thank you so much, Heather. I really appreciate all your insights there. From here, I was going to hand over to Alan. So we've been talking a little bit kind of generally about data and data literacy, but Map Action is really focused specifically on geospatial data. So I was kind of wondering, are there things that are unique in data training around geospatial data that you've experienced, or is it similar? And what are kind of the approaches and tactics that you've learned over the years, things that work for kind of identifying audiences and then understanding their needs and really delivering to their needs? So over to you.
Thanks very much. I mean, I'll just pick up on what Heather was saying about sort of real life stories and understanding the organizations that you're working for first. I think that's part of the ground that you have to set before you get into the training course itself. And having that awareness raising amongst the decision makers and the strategists and the bosses is absolutely essential before you get into the actual programs themselves. GIS is often seen as that sort of black box that you throw at something and you get nice looking maps out the end of it. And so many both managers and technical people, when they go into this, don't understand about all the other dependencies you have in terms of data, software, and capacity to actually manipulate this stuff is important. So I think that's the distinction here. And actually, I'm almost going to turn the challenge on its head and say the opportunity when you have overlapping audiences is get them together to discuss all the issues. And we've used that quite regularly in recent courses. Where you might have a GIS expert from a physical planning department, say, and then also the disaster management expert coming in, and they both share the experience and buddy up when you get into the training exercises to be able to share that experience. And we're finding that increasingly that sort of peer-to-peer learning is really helping us quite a lot. And I think part of that is that both disaster management and GIS remote sensing is completely jargon ridden. And it's partly having people explain their jargon and give that context is actually really useful. And the other aspects I just want to pick up on very briefly is the fact that Map Action are moving towards working with civil society organizations much more, and that's a very diverse group in itself, and some of them are incredibly small organizations. And as has already been said, we don't want to be wasting a huge amount of time giving non-appropriate learning to these organizations. So it is understanding them and what time they have to deliver on. But that also means that if we can work with the networks that those civil society organizations are part of, we can actually share that learning again across a whole wide range of different organizations and situations. We're using the concept of spillover now, where you find a context where one civil society organization looking at one specific issue manages to make some sort of data and mapping system work for themselves. Then we try and find what other organizations in that same network have similar situations where you could spill over that thing. It's not about scaling things up. It's about reapplying the same lessons in other places. So that's part of where we're going at the moment too. Over.
Thank you so much. I think that was really great. And I really, I know one of the first people who had responded to like what their top data challenge was how to break down those silos. And so I think it's really great that you kind of brought in that idea of like using the overlapping audiences and kind of bringing them together to better understand how they can work in kind of cross-functional teams, understand each other's jargon, and really get stuff done. So I think that's a really great point, and I appreciate that. Dirk or Cedric, do either of you want to come in on this question or on this challenge, kind of how you identify these different audiences and understand their needs?
I actually will be happy to riff on that on your next slide. So I will hold on.
Okay, it's like you know what I'm going to say.
How do I know that? But wait, Cedric might have something that he wants to add and share.
No, Dirk, please do.
Okay, so we have about 15 minutes left. So we'll go on to the next challenge. I call this the Pinterest board of data training. But really, like, you know, it's not actually the Pinterest board of data training, it's the Pinterest board of data resources, where we kind of, what I say is, what we know is that for people to learn and build their skills, they need a curated experience designed to kind of guide them through what they need to learn. But with limited time and resources and so many things that we need to cover, sometimes it feels like the best that we can do is like literally throw everything we have onto a website and hope that they can kind of navigate and get through it. So Dirk, over to you. Maybe riffing on the last challenge and kind of what works here on, you know, not designing for no one, but also not throwing everything at them and expecting them to muddle through.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the first thing to say, and just to be, you know, put this out there is nothing that we are doing these days that is not a data project. Like everything is a data project, and we have to really start to be cognizant of that. And I think the other thing too is that we really have to make sure that people understand that data is a team sport, right? So it isn't about somebody sitting in a dark room and going through the spreadsheet and, you know, doing everything by themselves. Everybody in the organization, project, team has a role to be playing in the data project. And what it is that we need to identify that, and we need to be intentional about it. So, you know, in just giving that example of data as a team sport, you've got people who might be asking a question that the data needs to answer. You've got people who are going to go out and get the data and find it. And people that are going to go out, not just finding it, but collecting it from other people. You've got people then who are then doing that analyzation. So what is the data telling us? What does it say? Then you've got people who are going to be taking that analyzation and putting it into communication, right? And getting it back out to people. Then what is largely happening is people are often then making decisions based on that data, and then people are taking action. And after they start taking action, the cycle starts all over again. But this thing is that you have to be intentional about data being a team sport. And then the other thing, if you really are being intentional, you are building data culture. And if you are building data culture, that means you are building learning culture, right? And so if you are effectively using all this data that you are collecting, you are learning, and you are both learning in terms of the organization, right? How is the organization being effective? How is it moving forward in its mission? How is it getting the job done? But each person that is in that list of being within a team sport are both learning about how they're doing their job better, but also they are part of that journey in terms of the organization becoming more effective. So they are also learning as well in terms of the organizational journey, and they're being a part of it. So you have to be intentional about that. And as part of that building a data culture, you have to know what it is that each of these people want to know and what do they need to know, and also setting out pathways for them to be learning and building skills and allowing them to do that so that it's there. So It all has to be intentional. And then I think the other thing to say is, people are going to be very much, basing that learning journey on, the own challenges that they face. And so, making sure that they can have the opportunity to articulate their challenges and figure out a path forward, but that is being communicated within the organization. So everybody sort of knows each other's challenges, what are going on. I feel like I'm framing a utopic thing here that doesn't actually exist, but you get where I'm going with this. It really is you have to be intentional. You have to really make sure that everybody is engaged, empowered, and part of the project, and they know what that is.
No, I think that's really great, and I love this idea that a data culture and learning culture kind of come together. We're never going to just have all these data skills and then be able to stop as an organization. We always are needing to upskill ourselves. So maybe Heather, I'll go over to you. I see you have your hand open, and then I was going to go over to Alan as well to kind of talk about this and how you do this, how you make this utopia a reality. You're muted, Heather.
It was just my turn, Caitlin. It was just my turn. I'm really warm to building a data culture at a place of learning, but we also need to talk about the fact that data is about power too. This is every single data point, especially in humanitarian action, is someone's life. It's someone's details. It's someone's future potentially. And so always being with a protection mindset, which all of us are very strong on and very important, very focused on. When we think about protecting data and working in a responsible way, every single component of the learning process and the culture building and all the shiny things that we get to work on and all the practical things must always focus on kind of two things. One, that the data that we're working with is fragile, and that it belongs to somebody else, and they trusted us to be able to do something with it to help with their whatever is required. And with that, I just wanted to give an example. We partnered with the Center for Humanitarian Data and our community engagement accountability team on the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, and the Ebola response around feedback loops to make sure that the local communities, who are the most important people we serve, we work for them, that those local communities, the data that they provide, that they get feedback on that data, and that we make sure that we respect and honor the fact that they trusted us to make a decision and to help them, whatever the data processing cycle we did. This is part of our data culture. And I think Dirk really mentioned that we need to make sure that all stakeholders are involved. And the idea that a local community member gives us a data as humanitarians and asks us to protect it, to make a decision to help, that responsibility comes all the way down to making sure that we tell them what we did with their data. Right, and that's really critical. And as we improve on community engagement accountability, the methodologies may never use phones in a risk area, in a conflict zone. They may only use paper. So we need to make sure that as we're giving back that feedback to say this is what we did it. One humanitarian health worker said to me, and I'll just close with this. She said, not only did I tell them how I did use their data, I told them how I didn't use it. And that's also important. Like the idea that if I'm not going to use your data, or I made a decision that wasn't where you wanted it to go, I also have that conversation, because data in the end is about communities and trust, and it's about culture and learning. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that's a really beautiful point, and thank you for making that the data we're collecting, it's about people, and honoring those people in our work is incredibly important. I wanted to hand over to Alan on this one as well to kind of talk about some of the things that Map Action does to kind of address this challenge. So over to you.
Thank you. That's a simpler question than trying to fix the utopia that you wanted me to look at earlier. Yeah, I think just adding on from the sort of conceptual model, I've probably just got a few tips of where we're sort of leaning towards. I mean, we've all got used to remote training being the norm now, and I think just having that diversity of approaches, because everybody wants to learn in different ways, is really important. And I hope that death by bullet point is a thing of the past. I think also, we're not only training people as technicians, but we're actually training the end users of the data as well. So they have to be involved in this process. And a lot of it's about storytelling in the mapping world. You know, it was all right in one time just to put data on a map and show it and expect people to pick it up. We've realized that doesn't really work. So it is actually making the whole community understand how to use data, not just the technicians that produce good analysis. The other aspects, I think, from that are the sort of modularization, that you've got so many different elements to learn that we do need to have a sort of structured area, but allow people to pick and choose how they can actually go through their learning and go through different channels to do core learning, do extra reading, do exercises, of course, but also think about open-ended questions. And I think, again, I'm moving back to this idea that peer-to-peer learning is actually getting more important. So we're not just broadcasting what's the best technique, but it's more about two-way communication between those who are training and those who are using it. And I think that goes back to partly what Heather's saying, is then embedding it within the organization, and you're actually getting people doing their job and they're thinking about the training that they've learned and seeing how they can improve it by actually doing real projects at the end of the day. And finally, I think it's become important to us, a question that was asked in the chat earlier on about staff leaving all the time, moving on, you lose that knowledge. It is really essential we find very good structures to be able to capture that institutional history and that knowledge, so that the new people coming along can have a head start and not start again from scratch. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Just because of time, I'm going to go to Cedric really quickly because I saw you had your hand up. So please jump in.
Yes, I just wanted to build on what was said about, I think, like, if we put together the peer-to-peer learning that Alan mentioned and the question of power that Heather mentioned, I think that relates to one of the initiatives that we tried to do when we build organizational capacity, and organization being either an actual organization, but can be also a network. And what we try to do is to empower some people within the organization or the community to be the driver of like sustained change within the community. And like having this peer-to-peer organization helps a lot with making this kind of transformation sustainable. It also forces you to think about who should be the one in the driver's seat, who are the people who should have their voice heard, and should be supported specifically so that their perspective is not forgotten in that work. There is an element of, we can very often fall into the trap of thinking that data is neutral or data training is neutral, but we really need to bring a critical perspective with us when we do these trainings and understand that we shouldn't give bad habits to people thinking that everything can be solved with data, but we shouldn't also keep our bad habits of simply, for example, going to the most senior person or the most accessible person because this is the easiest path for us. It's also about making sure that the right people have their voice represented and have the ability to drive the community in a certain way.
Thank you so much. I really think we kind of like talked a lot about this one, and it's so important because these strategies are what's going to help us succeed, and making sure that we have kind of peer-to-peer approaches, that we're developing learning organizations, that we're building institutional knowledge. All of that is so critical as we kind of transition to organizations that are able to use data really, really effectively. The last challenge, and I appreciate there's 3 minutes left. So Dirk, you're basically going to get the kind of ending bit here, because I want to hear from you a little bit on the network-centered resources. But very quickly, the challenge is we're always starting from scratch. So I want to hear from Dirk a little bit about how we can build sustainability into the resources that we develop and the resources we develop to do this work. So over to you. You have 2 minutes.
Great. So, I mean, just to say the headline is, curate, not create. And particularly when you're developing resources, I think one of the things that we've all noted, there are a lot of data literacy resources out there, and there's a lot of fantastic data literacy resources. So you should never be starting to develop a data literacy resource from scratch. But you know, in the spirit of what we've just been saying in terms of peer learning and peer stuff, you should be bringing people together to talk about what works and what doesn't. So even in terms of, you know, people's learning journey, if you've got an organization where people are grappling with data literacy, bringing them together to talk about how they're grappling with data literacy and what they're using, what they're finding that works and what doesn't, is huge. And you can start to build a library of data literacy resources rather than just starting one from scratch. And I think the other thing to say, you know, anytime you are bringing together a community or a group of people to be doing that and building that library, you're building it with them and for them. So that is a way to also assure that you've got something that is sustainable. People are going to be much more willing to put time into things that they feel like are their own, right? And they're free to use, edit, modify as they see fit because they've put it there. Goes a long way. And so with that, I'll end my rant. Curate, not create.
Curate, not create. That's a beautiful place to end. Just as like a few shameless plugs with a minute left. Heather, Dirk, and I organize what is known as the Data Literacy Consortium. So if you want to get together, we have a fantastic mailing list. We're going to be doing a few more calls, I think, this year to kind of discuss these issues more as a group, and like we try to do breakout groups and things like that. So join our mailing list so you can hear about the next Data Literacy Consortium call. And then, of course, I mentioned at the beginning, HDX. So if you need to find humanitarian data, I strongly recommend going to the Humanitarian Data Exchange. And if you want to sign up for our newsletter, please feel free to do it. I want to thank all of you for your time and attention and participation here today. And of course, I want to thank my lovely, lovely panelists. Thank you, Alan, Cedric, Dirk, and Heather for joining me and agreeing to participate when I asked you to join maybe a day before Christmas. So really appreciate all of you making the time and being available. And this was a lovely conversation. So thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thanks Caitlin, for hosting.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Caitlin. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.